Hi, welcome to Discover Creativity. It's a pleasure to have John Cabra and Madison Raposo. They are going to have a conversation about creativity, and you will enjoy it very, very much. I've met John many years ago, and he has a tremendous experience in creativity, not only in the United States, but also in other different countries like Mexico and Colombia. He has done research in different places. So I'll let you start, Madison, and I'll talk to you later.
Okay, sounds great. Well, hi, I am Madison. So it's nice to meet you virtually.
Thank you, Nelson. Likewise. Yes.
um, I was really excited to. A little bit about me, just like quickly. I'm in Dr. Ramos's creative thinking class. I actually went to undergrad at A&M, so I took his class in undergrad, and I actually took his wife's as well. So they are awesome. I just think that they are amazing people. And then I decided to come back and do my grad school. So I have some questions just to kind of get the conversation started. I want it to be as casual and as easy as possible. But my first one is, what made you want to kind of explore creative thinking? What was it, that kind of catalyst that you can maybe think of, or maybe it's something that kind of happened in your career even before that made you want to kind of explore creative thinking?
So, what sparked it really is connected to something that happened that was serendipitous, meaning
Okay.
that I'm going to have to take you back to 1985, actually 1984. And I was carpooling with a friend. We were commuting. And so it was my turn to drive, but I was waiting in the student union for him to complete his history in music class.
Hmm.
And it just happened to be one day where all of a sudden something in my mind said, rather than wait at the student union, why don't you go sit in this class and then learn something? It's a big auditorium.
Yeah.
So it was like people would notice I'm new to the class. And it just happened to be on that day, there's a guest speaker from the Creative Studies Department at Buffalo State named Ed Zylowitz. And he began to speak about the theory of creativity, but he made it very interactive and very engaging. Mm-hmm. And he had a great sense of humor. And I'm watching this all unfold, and I started to get animated about the possibilities of what I can do with this content and how it could support me as I pursued my business major and then my career in industry. Mm-hmm. What struck me as well is that I'm looking to my left and my right to see if people around me are getting just as excited about this guest speaker, but I didn't get a sense of that. Mm-hmm. And I decided at the moment that I wasn't going to transfer out of Buffalo State College because I was interested in doing international business. They didn't have a program there. So I figured just get my GPA up, I'll transfer out. But that was such a critical incident, seeing this person who represents the department speak to creativity, that I decided to stick around and pursue a minor degree in the scientific study of creativity. Yeah. And as I took these courses, which was around understanding the theory, understanding definitions and the science of creativity, and I was also getting mastery of the creative problem-solving process, I just felt that I needed to get more of it. And I saw the clear relationship between that and how that was going to support me in terms of the problem sets that I was going to face as a manager of an operations or a business overseas. Mm-hmm. But what also happened is that I realized that I fell in love with how the teaching approaches and the pedagogy involved with teaching this. And as you know, because you mentioned Hector and Suzanne, and that pedagogy, they picked up much of it from when they went to school at Buffalo State University. Mm-hmm. So it's that pedagogy, that teaching approaches that I was exposed to that made me take a switch. I switched and I decided I'm not going to pursue, I will go into business. Mm-hmm. And go into industry, but I really fell in love with teaching because of this pedagogical approach. And so it's 1985, doing the minor degree in creative studies, majoring in business. After I graduated from Buffalo State College at the time, My first job was with Fisher Price Toys, started in Western New York, and then they transferred me to Mexico so I was responsible for all the training and development done in Spanish, and a lot of the courses that was involved with the menu of soft skills training and courses involved creative problem solving, involved the facilitation of creative problem solving with engineers and designers. And off on a side note, how cool is it, Madison, that the products that came out of your session, where you see it one day in the Toys R Us, that came from a session that I facilitated creative problem solving.
That's cool.
Yeah, and it's those kinds of experiences that I wanted to do more. So I can go on, but I'll just stop there, see if that answered the question, if you want to.
Yeah. No, I think that's great. And and you kind of highlighted or touched on it a little bit already, just how seeing the toys or the products that you helped facilitate manage, like in store, you would probably consider that a highlight in your career and teaching and facilitating that creative thinking? Are there any more that kind of stick out to you that are like, wow, this is like a wow moment for me?
Yeah. With this field, let me tell you, I'd be surprised if other colleagues that have got the same kind of training I'd be surprised if they said, really, you're limiting me to one. I got a real long list, because this is a very transformational process. This field is, when you dedicate yourself to it, it's very transformational for not only for oneself, but for others as well. And so there's a long list. But yes, Fisher Price was a big deal because of those products. But because when I was working in Mexico, we would pull employees from the line and the supervisors working on quality issues involving some of the products they were producing in these manufacturing plants. And to have a breakthrough that would save the organization, thousands and thousands of dollars, whether it's that or saving time to getting it from point A to point B, those kinds of breakthroughs are also very much something that sticks with you for a very long time. I'm sure I'll tell you some others, like another one that was really important to me. So I received a Fulbright scholarship when I was a professor at Buffalo State University, and I was assigned to a university in Colombia, South America, and what turned out to be just a 2-week assignment on getting research and development initiatives at this university to transfer and make its way into industry. It turned into a 5-year project where I was tasked to change the whole culture of that university so they can become the second creative campus around the world.
Wow.
So it was a huge initiative because you got to teach a certain way, and it's brought a lot of change and a lot of pain points. And so for me, making friends through that assignment and through that work and going through the pain points to eventually get it to where they made that transformation. And ultimately, what was a great metric is that university climbed up its rankings as one of the most innovative universities in the country of Colombia. So we're starting a lot of accolades, a lot of recognition. People would travel to this university to see what they were doing. And they had created their own Center for Creativity Studies, their own laboratory. They had started their own library just on the largest collection of creativity books in Latin America. And there was a host of other things they did to help transform and change that culture. So that initiative, that change initiative, was for me a really important one because it's still making a difference today with students and with the administration.
Yeah. The being able to see the long-term effects of your work is I teach 7th and 8th grade, and so being able to see some of my old my old students come back and they're like, Mr. Pozo, I did this. So I couldn't imagine that on a bigger scale than just my middle school students. But you mentioned kind of making friends, and that was kind of a difficulty, or people kind of teaching or doing something the same way that they've always done. Were there any other kind of drawbacks to integrating this creative thinking into your career or even teaching it?
Yeah. So at the time, people perceived the field as if it was an emerging discipline. And so
Hmm.
when it's an emerging discipline, I'm emphasizing the word emerging, there was almost the critique from some faculty was that this is still a discipline that's still getting its kind of bearings and getting kind of its foundation. And so there was a pushback with regard to working on a discipline that's much more established, like your philosophy, mathematics, those kinds of courses. And of course, the other thing too, the pushback is not something that people were willing to disclose. But as you know, Madison, that this kind of teaching approach requires people to let go of control.
Hmm.
So rather than lecture, right, when
Hmm.
you're facilitating, you quite don't know where the conversation is going to go. And so you have to
Yeah.
you have to think on your feet to craft those questions and guide the conversation. For example, if you're looking to facilitate a discussion as part of the lesson, that requires less control. Using Lego, for example, as a way of getting people to take a very content from a dense academic article and using Lego to make sense of it, meaning you take your mental model understanding of content, and now you're being asked to create a physical model that represents your mental understanding, your cognitive understanding of, so people will see Lego as potentially being frivolous, right?
Mm.
And can't get past these kinds of,
Yeah.
so those kinds of things is that I faced. But mostly it's really around fear
Mm.
that uh, and it varied. Some people feared that their reputations would take a hit. Some people feared the loss of control. Some people feared that they may get evaluated because, in trying something new, it may not go quite the way they expected, and it might hurt in their course evaluations or how they're evaluated by their supervisors or their chairs, what have you. There could be fear that I may lose out on my group identity because I'm now making mistakes.
Yeah.
Those kinds of fears that are tied with people going up a learning anxiety curve or learning anxiety.
Yeah.
Also, the pushbacks that I got from working with Columbia, but fortunately, with this university, we had very strong administrative support all the way to the president and the board members
Nice.
with regard to bringing me in. So that helped a lot, getting me through those 5 years. And I wasn't alone. I had some really good change agents there that helped me in that initiative. Yeah.
Wow.
There's a couple of other examples, but I know that you have your set of questions and time, so I'll just like eager, but
No, it's great. Where have you seen a lot of success in promoting creativity, either in the classroom or maybe even in a corporate environment or maybe some kind of training? Where have you seen kind of the most success with this creative thinking and this idea? I really liked how you mentioned the facilitating, specifically because I try to do that. I teach English, so discussion is like one of my most favorite things in the world. And middle school students have a lot of different ideas that they kind of ping off of each other, and I really I like that you mentioned that, because I try to incorporate that. And the thinking on your feet is something that I'm like, wait, I don't know how you got there, but I'm going to try and connect it back to what we're actually talking about, and I want to see how your brain works there, and they'll remember it too, which is so great.
absolutely. And you mentioned just a handful of skill sets, you're tying pieces from what people are telling you, right? So you can start to integrate things, and you're also helping people with making sense of things. And so, absolutely. So to your question, uh, um, I do work for a consulting firm called No Innovation. That's spelled KNOW. And if you were to look up, and it's just one word, No Innovation, like knowing about
Okay.
innovation. And
Gotcha.
for the website, you can get so much information in terms of the work they do. So in its essence, this is an organization that facilitates what I call interdisciplinary creative collaboration among scientists on tackling a problem set. So what I mean by interdisciplinary is that when they work on a problem set, we bring in folks and we screen for folks that have a mindset for kind of creative collaboration. They're open-minded, willing to take risk, willing to put their egos aside, right? And these are people that come across different disciplines. And so you can well imagine some of you can appreciate the complementary setup of that, because you can get a lot of creativity from that. But it can be challenging when you get people with they got their jargon, they got their discipline, they got their accomplishments. How do you get people to work in an interdisciplinary way? And so the creative problem solving process we use, and some aspects of design, we would sometimes we would run what we call a 3-day ideas lab, or a 5-day ideas lab. And an example could be, it could be generating more global vaccine for developing or countries that are less, have less resources than, let's say, the United States or Canada. And so they come together with the task of coming up with new project ideas, new research proposals that get funded. And so kind of imagine it like, it's like the Shark Tank, but without any teeth.
Okay.
And so they have to come together and come up with really good projects and proposals. They have to present them. And ultimately, there's an adjudication, meaning that the funding agencies will decide how many of those projects, research projects, what have you, will they fund. So the funding agencies could be the National Science Foundation, it could be the National Institute of Health, it could be NASA, and its equivalent around the world. Or it could be an actual university that has this funding that will provide the funding for those kinds of projects. So in terms of the success, how cool it is when you can get projects that get accepted, get funded, and then as you read up about it in the news, that as a result of the session, it's like the Fisher-Price thing, you go into and you see the product there. But in this case, in this context, how cool it is when you're reading, a science review magazine or USA Today or something on CNN or Fox News, and you see that work, that what came out of that research project has come to fruition, and it's making a difference. So those kinds of things are needless to say, you get moved by it, you get inspired, and you feel, of course, really good that you made contributions to something like that.
Yeah. Do you think that there's any specific research or research of study that would be meaningful to actually creativity now? Is there anything that?
Oh, where do I start with this? Because I love research. I'm constantly combing through academic journals, but I'll start with some of the more classic ones, and then I'll start moving towards some of the stuff that you're seeing in neuroscience area. Okay. There's a term that is called the serial order effect. That's what it's called in the cognitive sciences. And what that means is, in its essence, about striving for quantity. Okay. But let me anchor that a little bit more. It means that your first series of ideas that one generates when they're working on a problem set or series of options typically are ones that are familiar, ones they've seen before. So we really push people to come up with as many options as possible, hence strive for quantity, so that they can get past that first series. Because once it exhausts that, then the brain starts to wrestle with the challenge of, now I got to come up with something that's not familiar, but something that's novel. So the second series is where you push people for more quantity, you start getting into ideas that are novel. And it's not uncommon when I'm working with the scientists, for example, where people say, don't you think, John, in the half day that we've been together so far for this part of the process, don't you think 300 ideas is enough? No, I keep pushing for more. So that third series, now not only do you get novel ideas, but you get more sophisticated ideas. And so the research has shown time and time again is that when you get judges that are domain experts, let's say that the project I was on involving global vaccine equity, and you get judges that are experts in that domain, in that area, what you get is when you ask them to independently judge the quality of ideas, guess which in those three series which ideas get selected as being the better ideas. And it's usually the latter part of the second series and into the third series, right? So that's why we push for 300 ideas, 500 ideas with 30 people in the room, right? And to get that output. There was one researcher out of McMaster's, Dr. Min Bassler, and he wasn't quite able to replicate the study, but he had an explanation for why the quality of ideas were distributed among those three series. And that is that his subjects were trained in creative problem solving. So they can quickly series, right? And get into real novel, you know? So that's, I really push for that kind of stuff. Incubation studies, just to me, I find really fascinating that you keep pushing people really hard to work on a problem set. And I think it to a point of exhaustion. When you reach that point is where I find it a necessity to have people go for a walk, right? And if it's raining outside, then what I do is I put like one of those nature videos you might see sometimes on an airplane where people are trying to board and you're trying to bring down the tension. So I'll show something like that if it's raining outside or the weather's it's inclement. But ideally, you want people to go for a walk. Don't use the technology. Don't talk to each other, right? And just be one with nature. And what happens there is that what I'm trying to do, and let me stop for a moment, because what I do to precede that is I'll ask this question a lot in workshops. I ask people, where do you get your best ideas? What do you do? Where are you? And generally speaking, predominantly people will tell me things like, I'm in the shower. I was ready to go to bed. I was washing. I was taking the dog for a walk, right? Or I just got up from bed. And what's common with that, Madison, is that the people's brains were in a relaxed state. And when it's a relaxed state, it sets it up. It lends itself for the brain to use what's called an associative process, meaning it starts combing through its working memories to make connections among things that are not even connected, right? To address that problem that you weren't able to quite get the aha moment, right? Sort of like the brain doesn't like it. It becomes a nag for the brain because at the conscious level, you weren't able to address it quite yet.
Yeah.
Right. And so at the subconscious level, when you're relaxed and even thinking about the problem set, your brain is working at the subconscious level, trying to address what you didn't address before. The best way to set that up is, again, this incubation, these walks with nature, stuff like that. And that is not distracted by technology or talking to people, just stay present. Right. And so the research around that I find to be really important. And I find myself to bring in that a lot in workshops. The neuroscience, I've been really fascinated with the work that's been done in terms of deferred judgment. Like the neuroscience work, I get blown away because Alex Osborne, who identified deferred judgment as a really important guideline to the generation of ideas. Alex Osborne is the father of brainstorming. Right? The neuroscientists were able to identify what Alex Osborne had concluded many years ago. For example, there's a neuroscientist, James Lamb, I believe is his name, and he's also a jazz musician, loves jazz, of course. So one of his studies was, let me invite jazz musicians to come to laboratory. I will create, and in his head, what he did was he created it was like a keyboard, but it was modified so that when people are in the fMRI machine, mirror fixed on top of that circular piece that you see in the fMRI machine, so that when the subject's inside, they can see themselves playing on the piano, right?
Okay.
An fMRI machine. So the researcher, James Lamb, would play piano with the understanding that the subject inside would have to respond, right? Jazz, it's improvised. You just kind of got to go.
Yeah.
It's play. And what he saw in the results in the fMRI readouts is that the part of the brain that involves with executive function, like executive decisions, a lot of the judgment that comes in there, that part of the brain, sort of using the word, sort of like was dimmed. It was dimmed. So to me, I'm seeing that as like, and you can understand it because with improvisation, with jazz, there's no time to bring in judgment. You just got to like respond among the other musicians. So here I am seeing for the first time, right, this study where it shows here's deferred judgment at its finest.
Yeah.
Are to this. Now we all know because I've read on workshops that improvisation is really important to creativity. Now why, right?
Yeah.
So I find that to be a really, really fascinating work.
Yeah. That is there are things that you don't, or I don't at least think about when it comes to creativity. Sometimes I feel like maybe I put it in a box, and it is really interesting to hear that there are things outside of, just even in a classroom, like this can be applied to a bunch of different scenarios and places. And that's just really cool. What are some simple steps that people could take to enhance creativity?
Yeah. I think for me, there's a need for people to do much more interpersonal work. Where, for example, taking a journal and reflecting and writing about those moments where they're in a meeting and they're calling for ideas and they didn't share ideas. A lot of ideas get killed here. And so that calls for reflections. Where did that come from? What were the critical, that sometimes will require some deep work because it could have come from school where you got criticized by a teacher, you got really bad feedback, could be ridicule that happened among classmates. Then that follows you into undergraduate school, things that could happen there, certainly happens at work. And so I think there's a big need for people to do things at the interpersonal level where they start reflecting. Why did you stop yourself from actually sharing ideas? But I also think that should be coupled with or balanced with getting people to reflect on when did you have those moments where you didn't have fear and you shared ideas? What made that context and the situation different than when you didn't? And then see if you can replicate that. So you take a much more appreciative approach to when you've had those moments where you showed courage, you're willing to take risk and not have fear, and you're willing to share those ideas. Start at the interpersonal level, and watch how that influences your work at the interpersonal level when you work with others. I think that's where there's a lot more work needed. I still see that day in, day out. Doesn't matter the context where I go in the world. You can see it when you do warm-ups, you can see it. Call people on it. I says, look, we're going to do these warm-ups over and over and again until you start feeling comfortable with this, but I will tell them, look, folks, I gave you a quota. You didn't reach it. Let me tell you what I'm noticing. I said, I'm noticing this. I know inside your heads, I can see in the eyes, right? And that's so I keep nudging them and giving them permission to share ideas, So that's one thing. I think what doesn't the second thing, did you say you asked for one or a couple of things?
As many as you please. Yeah.
So there's another guideline that Alex Osborne identified, which is about considered novelty or considered wild and unusual ideas. And I quite don't think that in the field, we take that guideline to heart. It doesn't get internalized quite the way I expect people to internalize it when it comes to exercising and operationalizing that guideline. So let me give you an example, and hopefully it's not something that's going to get edited, but it's a really powerful story. So I was in Colombia, and we were doing, it was a creative problem solving course, and it involved faculty from across disciplines. And they're working on a problem set, which is about how to get some of the person who oversees this program involves courses that it's an extension for the community. Those kind of extension courses that help support and provide service for the community. So he wanted to do more of that or find ways in which you can market and bring that out to the community. Someone in there, I don't remember who it was, and I don't know if they were testing the veracity or testing me on how integral I was going to be for the guidelines. I don't know if they were trying to be, if it was them being serious about exercising the guideline, or where they were testing me, right? So while people were generating ideas, right, somebody said, use sperm. And let me tell you, the energy in there, and it was like crickets, because people were waiting to see how I was going to respond to that idea. I wrote it down, right? Because I had to defer judgment. When I wrote it down, there was a professor in there who teaches law. She crossed her arms. She looked at me, and then she went like this, because I don't understand how, for the life, it's all in Spanish, how in the life for me, how you could think that idea has any value, and then you put it up on the flip chart paper, you know, because it was an unsettling idea.
Yeah.
So here's my teachable moment, right? To help appreciate when we say allow for wild, unusual ideas, how those ideas have value. The other thing too is when we say all ideas are good. Yeah, some people may argue, well, come on, not all ideas are good. There's going to be some ideas.
Yeah.
But here's what I mean by this. So let me go back to a teachable moment when that law professor got upset. I said, all right. And I have to think on my feet. This is about being creative, so I said, okay, let's unpack this. I want you, and I did a tool, it's called attribute listing, right? I said, okay, tell me about what are the biomechanics makes a sperm operate and function, right? What are the biomechanics, right? And so we started writing down those biomechanics. I was fortunate, not that I needed him there, but I happened to have a medical doctor in there.
Oh.
So here comes this list of attributes, and then the list was made longer. So as I'm writing this list, I stopped and says, okay, now I want you to do is, now that taking the problem set that we have here about taking these extension courses to the community, what kind of ideas can you get, like use these attributes, right, as an analogy, as a metaphor to inspire new ideas on this. So I will say, look, I gave you a prompt. Some of you are going to struggle with that. That's okay. Let it struggle. Let the mind work magic as it goes through its working memory, trying to struggle with that, trying to force a connection between something that seems apparently has nothing, seemingly doesn't have anything to do with this problem set. So you just wait. And I said, just be patient. All of a sudden, you just need that one person. Aha. I write that down. Then, this is popcorn effect.
Yeah.
Getting all these ideas down. And would you believe that the ideas that he selected as one of the best ideas came from that moment.
Wow.
So here's what I mean, that I will push people to share gibberish, wild and unusual, because people tend to hesitate and sharing ideas. And then once they are true to following my instructions and take that to heart, I will give pause and I say, look, I want you to go back to your ideas. And I says, are there anything from your stations where you have the small groups are working that seem to be silly, ridiculous, outlandish, nonsensical? Just pick an idea and here's how I want you to work with it, Yeah. Then you get more ideas. I don't think that happens enough, right? Working in groups. And I think that needs to happen. So from an individual perspective, I think in addition to deferring judgment on yourself, I think people should be more deliberate in coming out with wild, unusual ideas and struggle with it to let the brain work its magic, try to address something that seems to be nonsensical and is not connected to the problem set or the opportunity. I think that's a second thing that people should be doing more often.
Yeah.
I think the third thing, and this comes again from research work, and this is why we do a lot of work with scientists, is that I think it's really important for people not to get just so fixated in their own respective domain or their majors or their minors. That means if you can go to conferences that have nothing to do with your major, do that. The more we interact that's so far removed from your expertise and you interact with that, my God, that really helps with regard to developing the working memory or putting something in your memory so you can make some really good connections towards creativity. go down the library aisle and just randomly pick a book
Yeah.
and read it, go through it and get some goodness out of it, even though it's not associated with your, that's great. Now, I also think travel is great because when you travel, you're in a way, you're forced to adapt to a new language, to do new traditions. Things are so, and the more different the culture, the better. Now, not everybody has the resources to travel all the time, but you can look for a diaspora within your own city, right? And go eat at the restaurants there, go interact, go to, but when I was in Western New York, I would attend a Burmese Buddhist get together. It was like their own respective, like a sermon, so to speak. Right. And there was a Buddhist monk there, and I would just attend just for the experience of it.
Yeah.
Those kinds of things really help with regard to creativity, because again, you have some major ahas when you can make connections among things that are disparate or so disassociated. Right. So the more diversity that you have, the better. And quite frankly, if we really think about our prehistory, when prehistoric men and women migrated out of their respective regions and went into a different region, what's required? Adapting, flexing, solving problems for things they've never encountered before. So that the notion of adapting and flexing, I think that still lives today in us.
Yeah.
So more of it. I think it also lends itself to creativity and creative thinking.
Yeah. Yeah. I have like two more questions, and then I'll be done. But one thing I think I've seen just in the classroom is the use of AI and artificial intelligence. My kids try to use it to write their papers, and how do you suggest harnessing creativity or using AI? How can they go hand in hand? Is there a way that can kind of be incorporated, or what do you kind of think about that?
So I certainly believe they can go hand in hand, and I think there's any organization that's not embracing AI for creative collaboration efforts, I think are behind. So to me, take any step of a creative problem solving process or any creative process, right? And if you get better at creating prompts, right? First, you train the learning model by giving it context. Here's the brief, right? And give it as much data as possible. Then you could say, look, what I want you to do is to, number one, can you come up with all the questions that one needs to generate or ask themselves so they can go out and get more information to understand this context? That's one part of the process. You can also tell it, all right, you can write, in the chat, you can say and create and formulate the learning model. You can say, look, one of the ways in which you can define a problem set is by asking open-ended questions, such as how to write we, and here's some examples. Now, instruct the learning model or the AI to come up with 20, 50 ways in which you can define or reframe the problem set using these open-ended question statement starters, right? And so now you have like 50 of them. So you have your 50. I think it's always good for now the group to comb through that and use that as a sounding board or a platform to generate even more, right? To add 50. Now you can use AI to actually make sense of it. So like qualitative studies, where you take a whole bunch of narratives from the interviews and you code it, and then you start to cluster them based on similarity, and then you give it titles. We've done where we've asked and instructed AI to do that as well. So now you start getting all your questions that reframe the challenge. You get them grouped.
Wow.
You get it titles, right? And now you have it organized, and you've leveraged AI to make sense of all these questions. And then you can say, look, can you give me a frequency count of this? Now you're starting to get data around this to make more sense of this. So I'm seeing more of that. I think more of that's going to occur. So you can go to Ideate and you can do the same thing. Here's the question that we selected, the open-ended question that we believe defines the problem set. Now come up with as many ideas as possible to come out. Great. Now, here's a tool that's called Force Connections. The way it works is boom, 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 boom. Here's an example, right? Reason why this tool works this way, here's some science.
Yeah.
So I'm informing, I'm teaching the learning model.
Yeah.
The AI. Great. Now that you understand Force Connections, and I've given you some examples, I want you to come up with some ideas. Now, if the ideas aren't revolutionary enough, I want you to be much more radical with that. Always with the understanding that whatever it generates, I always feel it's really important for the group to use that as inspiration to come up with their own ideas.
Right.
So it's not a heavy line on AI, but it's also not shortcutting people's own imagination
right.
as well. Right.
Yeah.
So you can also train it for tools to help evaluate against criteria. What are the criteria that is really important, given the context that we shared with you up front? What criteria do you think it's really important for us to evaluate ideas? Here's our set. Are we missing anything?
Right.
So you get a sense for how it could be utilized.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. That's great. So last one, and it's kind of, I guess, are there any questions or anything else that you kind of want to add that maybe I missed or that,
nice. I saw that question and I said, this is probably an extension of my understanding of creativity, but really it's about, if you were to ask me, which theory of creativity do you subscribe to?
Okay.
There are several. I mean, the creative problem solving, its heritage is tied to research work that was conducted by cognitive scientists. You're now seeing a lot of work around neuroscience. But the theory that I don't think is getting enough research work, in my view, is on the theory on psychedelics. And I'm not talking about psychedelics, the illicit kind, although there is research work around the illicit, like the use of acid and LSD. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the psychedelics that involves mindfulness, meditation, those kinds of things. And I tell you where that came from. My daughter she's a physics and math major at University of Colorado Boulder. And she's now starting to make her way into aerospace engineering. So she's talking to a physics professor at the University of Buffalo in New York. And she asked him, like, what are some things that she needs to consider in terms of problem sets that she should work in looking for solutions?
Yeah.
And he said to her, and this person's, I forget what part, he might be from Serbia or around that region. And his is the equivalent of the Nobel Peace Prize winner in his country. Wow. And he said to her, I'm going to tell you this, but I want you to be careful with what I'm going to tell you, because the scientific world is not ready for this. And that is, we need to explore more around consciousness, because the kind of solutions that we need to get for some wicked problems that exist around the world, we're starting to get saturated. That means we're starting to exhaust it. We're not getting anything new. We need some really important breakthroughs to address some serious problems. And take the UN's 17 sustainability goals. You see the different problem sets there. And he says, we need to start getting people to start tapping into subconscious mind, doing that kind of work. And he says, but again, with you in your early career, you talking about that, it's not going to lend it to you to get into your career as a mathematician, as a physician, aerospace, the field. But that struck me, because I'm familiar with my work with the science of creativity. I'm familiar with the theoretical strands of creativity. And I've always been fascinated with that particular strand. And I think that physicist teacher rather, he's onto something, what he was sharing with me. And so we know that this may skew towards more of the serendipity and esoteric. I just think that the brain is not being used in its full capacity. There's such huge resource out there that comes from that comes from not even our we don't even have a really good understanding of what comprises the universe and what it has to offer. And I think the brain's connection to that from a again, from that theoretical standpoint, the psychedelic, meaning doing more meditation, mindfulness, I think that needs to be, there must be a lot more work and much more importance placed in that theory. But people don't want to go there just yet. Does that make sense?
Yes.
That?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think the argument that, well, you can't measure it. Well, because you can't measure it doesn't mean it doesn't exist.
Right.
We should at least strive to constantly look for ways we can explore this phenomena, which I think does exist. However you want to couch it or position what I mean by the psychedelics, the legal kind.
Right. Yeah, that is really interesting because they say that, or I've seen that mindfulness, meditation, those are all really important things to incorporate into your life. So how that can kind of expand on creativity is something that is now interesting to me. So I'm a researcher, so I'm gonna be researching. I love that stuff. Well, thank you so much for talking to me and answering my questions. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, nice to meet you. Thank you.
It was nice to meet you too.
All right. Thanks.
Yeah.